Have you ever gone on IMDb and noticed that no matter how good the movie is, it always has 1-star reviews for some reason? It's usually a mix of trolls, incomprehensible nonsense, and some valid criticisms too. I'm typically of the opinion that most movies don't actually deserve a 1-star review. So I decided to start a series called 1-Star Reviews, where I decide if horror movies deserve the 1-star reviews they get on IMDb. Today, we're going to talk about the newly released Longlegs, directed by Oz Perkins and produced by Neon. We're going to start with this first review here. Couldn't tell you the name here. Right off the bat, you can see, starring Nicolas Cage as Caitlyn Jenner. So that just goes to show you what kind of quality content you can see in the 1-star review section. Longleg is a cinematic disaster from start to finish. Nicolas Cage is terrible, delivering a lifeless and uninspired performance. The screenplay is laughably bad, with dialogue that feels forced and unnatural. The pacing is excruciatingly slow, making the movie an absolute bore. They clearly tried to make a Silence of the Lambs kind of movie, but failed spectacularly. The worst part? It's not scary at all. For a horror film, this is unforgivable. The so-called thrilling scenes that fall flat, and there's no tension or suspense to be found. To top it all off, the film exhibits blatant transphobia, which is both offensive and entirely unnecessary. Overall, Longleg is a waste of time and money. Avoid it at all costs. This next 1 out of 10 rating, horrible. Straight and to the point. Legitimately the most excruciating cinematic experience I've ever had. There's almost no dialogue half the film. I left the theater early and I want my money back. IMDb can't help with that, sorry. Disappointing because I heard Nick Cage was great in it, but from the majority of the film that I watched, he spoke twice, and once was during the opening credits. This was the hottest piece of hyped up garbage I've seen since the last season of Thrones. Presumably Game of Thrones, unless there's some other show called Thrones that I'm unaware of. Cinematography scores at some points, as it was well shot, and maybe I'm missing out because I couldn't beat to finish it, but I don't believe the payoff in the last 30 minutes would be worth the time investment to get there. Thanks, Bender Rodriguez. Now, are these opinions fair? In my honest opinion, not really. Now, the first guy says that Nick Cage delivers a lifeless performance, which I honestly don't think you can say about any of Nick Cage's performances. It's actually quite the opposite, especially in this movie. There are some times where like the classic Nick Cage performance kind of shines through, but I really feel like the directors purposely cast him in movies for that reason. I don't think Nick Cage can give a bad performance no matter what movie he's in, and I will die on that hill. Even in that dumpster fire, yes. And the fact that I have a Nick Cage sequence pillow on my couch does not make me biased. One of the reviewers gives it a 1-star review because he's barely in the movie, and then the other reviewer gives it a 1-star review because his performance is like too much. The duality of man or something, whatever. I actually liked his character in the film. I found it very creepy and unsettling, and once I kind of forgot that it was Nick Cage playing the character, I actually kind of enjoyed it. I think a lot of the movies that people cite as bad Nick Cage performances are the director's fault. Nick Cage is like such a unique personality that the director really needs to know what they're doing when they're directing him. And I think this movie is a good example of him getting some good direction and getting a good performance out of him. Now, both reviews mention how slow and boring the movie is, and I just really don't get that. I understand that everyone has their own opinion, but some opinions are wrong. Complaining about a movie being too slow without providing any context is just outing yourself as having the attention span of a corn dog. I wrote that in the script, not sure what it means. A movie can be slow, but also do a good job at building the world and establishing the characters. A movie can also be slow and do nothing to service the plot or the characters. Just saying that it's a slow movie adds nothing to the conversation. I'll admit, even I have a cooked attention span. I can't even get through 5 pages of a book without realizing that I have been thinking about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire the whole time, and then I have to go reread the 5 pages that I went through. I think the pacing of this movie is perfect, and the cinematography and the framing and the shots are so good that even in the quote-unquote slow parts, I found myself like looking in the background, like scanning to see if I could find something creepy. I think Oz Perkins does a pretty good job at creating tension and suspense, where even in the scenes where nothing ever happens, you constantly think that something is going to happen and something's going to pop out at you. Masterful filmmaking. One of the reviewers even notes that there's no suspense, which I think is just objectively wrong. And I'm not even going to dignify that with a good response, because I think at that point you're just trolling. Like, even if you don't like the movie, you can't say that it's not suspenseful unless you're like an android or have no emotions. The first reviewer mentions transphobia in the movie. That one just came out of left field, in my opinion. I really thought long and hard about that one, and I honestly have no idea what they're talking about. The only thing I can think of, and I don't want to spoil anything, one of the characters has a certain look to them, but it's not stated if they're trans or anything. So I honestly think the reviewer is either just trolling or they mistook it as something that it wasn't. My thoughts, overall, I thought the movie was pretty good and refreshingly new. The story itself wasn't really anything special, and you could make a case that it's the same kind of movie that's been made a million times. But I honestly think that the cinematography and the acting and performances, the framing, the pacing, all of that kind of makes up for it. The beginning of the movie, or I should say like the first half, maybe even longer, sets up a really good, thrilling, suspenseful, like crime story or a crime thriller, and it just devolves into something completely different. The only issue I had was the ending of the film, and I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm honestly not even sure how I feel about it still, and it's been 24 hours since I've seen the movie. I really thought I was like stupid or I was missing something, but I think the fact that I'm still thinking about it and I'm still wondering what happened is a good thing. So many movies are just so forgettable, and you watch them and you don't even really remember what happened the next day. So I think the fact that a movie can kind of stick with you and make you still think about it and put the pieces together and makes you want to rewatch it is a good thing. I think too many movies, especially horror movies in the past like 15 years, rely so heavily on jump scares and spiking your heart rate that it's kind of refreshing to have a movie take its time, build the story and build the characters in the world, and immerse you in what's going on in the story. I think places like TikTok have kind of ruined people's brain with that. And I guess my only other problem with the movie was the marketing behind it, because they did a lot of work trying to tell people that it was going to be the scariest movie in like the last decade or whatever. And I typically don't like when movies are marketed that way. I get they're just trying to sell tickets. Like, it's not necessarily the movie's fault, but I did go into it kind of with no expectations purposely. I don't really watch trailers and expect the movie to be exactly like that. So I guess if I were to give this a rating, I would give it a 7 out of 10. Some flaws for sure, and maybe a questionable ending, but overall, I really enjoyed myself, and I found that it was pretty refreshing. I haven't been to the theaters in a very long time. This is the first movie I've seen in probably like a couple of years. So I would definitely recommend going and watching it in theaters if you can, just because the experience in the theater is great. Like, the sound design is so good. There's constant sounds that make you think you're going kind of crazy. It's really good. Let me know down in the comments what you thought about Longlegs, and let me know what other movies you'd like me to review 1-star ratings with next.